Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Enhance International's first in a series of webinars featuring scmBLOX, Chris White, and the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, Greg Schlegel, on structural modeling impact of supply chain policy misalignment. We appreciate you taking the time today. We all know you're very busy. It's a summertime here, and it may be wintertime in South Africa. So we appreciate everybody joining us today. This is the first of a new series of webinars that we've put together, the three of us put together. Of course, the first being structurally modeling the impact of supply chain policy misalignment. The second will be the physics of supply chains, buffer inventories, cycle times, and flow dynamics. And then we'll get into redesigning the chain, modeling the strategic implications of tariffs, onshoring, and restructuring. Then our fourth webinar in October will be Beyond the Dashboard, stress testing supply chains with structural modeling add-ons. And then we'll get into mapping the terrain, navigating the supply chain tech landscape for tactical and strategic advantage. Sounds exciting, huh? I'm excited. All right, so I want to again welcome our speakers, presenters today, Chris White and Greg Schlegel, both very esteemed. Greg comes from us, of course, from the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium since 2010. He has over 40 years of experience and is one of the fathers of course, supply chain risk management, publishing the book Supply Chain Risk Management, an Emerging Discipline back in 2015. He's also the former president of Apex, now ASCM. And of course, Greg never has slept, I guess, since he started in 2010. He does a lot of education, webinars, workshops, and consulting, focusing, of course, on supply chain risk and resilience. And then we have Chris White, who just recently got his doctorate in business administration, specializing in supply chain, and based in Texas. He's founder of scmBLOX, among a few other companies that you got to check out. He has over 30 years of experience in simulation modelings, as well as a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, among a lot of other accolades there. He has a few books out there, so check out that when you can. So the deliverables today. First, we're going to look at creating a shared understanding of the socio-economic stakes in the policy misalignment dilemma. Then we're going to get into the clear articulation of how policy silos distort recovery timelines and risk exposure. Then we're going to demonstrate on how structural modeling can reveal hidden interdependencies and optimize recovery strategies. That will be led by Chris. And then he'll show us a framework of embedding resilience into governance, incentives, and cross-functional strategy. And we'll close it out with some actual insights and peer benchmarking on resilience, maturity, and modeling readiness. So with that, we are all here trying to quantify risk, recovery, and resilience in this fragmented world that we live in today. We certainly have a VUCA world, and it just won't stop. And so with that, it really lends it well to what we're going to talk about today. So with that, Greg will give an overview on the consortium. Greg?
You bet. Thanks, Jim. Pleasure to be here with you to talk about something a little different, the impact of misalignment in supply chain. Who we are and what we do at the consortium. We're 33 companies. We're about 1,700 supply chain risk professionals around the globe. We operate in 23 countries. And on the right-hand side, we have more or less three pillars. The middle pillar is education. That's where we started, in the classroom with MBA work. We have a lot of education partners. The middle pillar is consulting. We do a lot of consulting where we lead, guide, direct, and coach companies on their supply chain risk and resiliency journey. And then on the right-hand side, we have a host of software as a service organizations who can do the heavy lifting in terms of supply chain mapping using AI, predictive analytics, weather predictions, and so forth. So we have a host of companies who can help you go if you want to do a heavy lifting and map and manage your entire global supply chain. On the left, we have a few offerings. We have 2 certificate courses. They're online. They're self-paced. They've been around for about 8 years. One is for manufacturers and the other is for services. And we do concentrate the second one on public healthcare. We do a lot of work with public healthcare donors and NGOs around the globe. We have 2 assessment tools. One is called Supply Chain Management Online Readiness Assessment. It's a best-in-class type of assessment. It evaluates your supply chain process maturity and inherent risk. And we have another one called Supply Chain Risk and Resiliency 90-Day Action Plan. That uses AI ML algorithms. It's pure risk, not so much supply chain, but it identifies where you are on our 5-stage risk maturity model. It identifies what your company's risk appetite is and what your company's culture is. We think those 3 things are very, very important before you start a supply chain risk and resiliency journey. We have coaching and consulting, like we said, and then we have platform solutions as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Hey, thanks, Greg. And I'm co-founder of scmBLOX. It just so happens the other co-founder, my business partner, Bob Schultes, is on this call. So thanks for joining us, Bob. And scmBLOX Supply Chain Management Blocks is an agent-based structural modeling approach for looking at supply chains and understanding the actions, reactions, recoverability of supply chains over the long term. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you'll actually see it in action later. This is the tool that we use to show some of the results. So anyway, we're part of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. And yeah, I'll stop with that because you'll see more of it in action later. So I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Chris. And with that, just to give you a little outline of Enhance International Group, we're a group of over 80 companies now, and we focus on finding collaborative partners to help end customers receive the 1 + 1 + 1 = infinity. So we provide group solutions, and we have everything from supply chain risk management with Greg and simulations with digital twins. We have HR assessments. We have supply chain logistics assessments. We have quite a plethora of different services that we provide with our exemplary partners. And as we're split up into strategy and execution disciplines, and of course, we have folks who can connect it all together to get your end-to-end decisions, which is what we're talking about today. We do have a new service coming out called ChainSight AQ, which is a supply chain risk management platform that involves 3 or 4 different partners, including the consortium. With that, I'll get right into the agenda today. Our first is strategic framing. You know, this is on the policy deployment, and then we'll get into diagnosing the problem of policy misalignment and amplified imbalances that we see out there. We'll give you some examples. And then Chris will bring us through that structural modeling in action. And then how do you design for resilience? And then the interactive scenario walkthroughs with some case studies that will surely get some discussion. So we encourage you throughout the webinar to enter comments in the chat. We also have the poll EV that we'll be asking throughout. So you'll see that in the chat. Please do try to get on the poll EV with your cell phone. It makes it much easier than flipping on your computer unless you have 2 screens. With that, Greg's going to kick us off with strategic framing.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. We wanted to start off with giving you some grounding statistics and definitions. So from a strategic framing, What seems to be the objective, if you look at that term and that phrase, and that is to set the stage for the urgency of policy-driven supply chain risk, which we are going to talk about very at length during this session. So take a look at some of the recent trends we've seen. Global trends, 50% rise in import concentration. That comes from the recent OECD report, which is quite good if you can get your hands on that. Why is that? Because it's due to the tariff volatility, and many of our companies have pulled forward raw material and parts in anticipation of a stoppage or shortage. 63% of resilient leaders today cite siloed thinking as a top barrier. That comes from friends of the consortium. That's BCI, Business Continuity Institute, which is a good friend and a longtime associate of the consortium. And then, of course, tariff and policy volatility is at a 90-year high, folks. That comes from McKinsey, but we all have seen it, we're witnessing it, and we're living with it as well. So what are some of the basic deliverables of strategic framing? Shared understanding of a socio-economical economic stakes to everyone, and the policy misalignment dilemma. That's what we're going to talk about today. And perhaps ways to be proactive in an ever-changing, complex VUCA world, as we talked about. VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, just for your reading pleasure. I will turn it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. With that, everybody wants to see examples. Oh boy. Everybody wants to see examples, and these are some examples that we see out there. Some notable examples: Standard Oil, AT&T, Microsoft, Google 2025. So this is nothing new out there. This has been out there for a while. And we've been having these notable cases of misalignment, as this slide is misaligned, oddly enough. I can laugh at myself. Enron and Deutsche Bank. So we all probably have heard of all these different occurrences, even back to Standard Oil. You might have heard of that. That's where the Sherman Antitrust Act became in vogue, and it ended Rockefeller's control over the oil industry. And then we have more recent things like Google in 2025 and the impact that may reshape digital advertising and search landscape. And we're living that as we are right today. They're talking about that almost every day. And I was actually in Houston at the time during the Enron days. Those were some interesting days. So that kind of led to Sarbanes-Oxley. So it's generally these big events that cause us to have policies, and because somebody doesn't abide by the rules or breaks the rules and creates more disruption, creating a more VUCA world. With that, we'll go into diagnosing the problem, policy misalignment, and amplified imbalances. And Greg will kick us off on this.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. What we did here is we profiled a couple of types of misaligned government and business policies that can basically undermine your corporate sovereignty. But just take a look at a couple. And we're not probably telling you folks anything you haven't lived with every day, but regulatory uncertainty and compliance conflicts, those are always present, no matter what industry you're in. Just a matter of degree. Trade and tariff misalignments, you bet. That's in the forefront right now. We actually called the tariff issue in risk management a black swan. Nobody really saw that coming. All right, but you got to be proactive and responsive. Antitrust and competition policy clashes, that's always present as well, because we all work in a global supply chain. A couple more: national security versus corporate strategy, that's up and down all the time, folks, around the globe because of government direction and attitude. Divergent crisis response policies, that varies. Really, it varies by company based on the company's capability. And finally, forced localization of data sovereignty laws, that is purely government and industry driven, folks. So there are a lot of policies and procedures. We just grabbed a couple that can influence a company's corporate sovereignty and force them to make different policy decisions. So with that, getting you grounded, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
But everybody wants examples, so Greg kind of went through all those categories on the left column there. And in the middle column are some example companies that came to witness it, so to speak, face to face. And then the impact on sovereignty. So we can just pick out a couple of them. The first one I want to pick out is Volkswagen and Dieselgate. If you guys remember that, billions in fines, forced recalls, and stricter compliance. That was where the gas mileage was being adjusted by a computer chip in the Volkswagen to show that it was doing better than it actually was. And they got caught. And so that really hurt Volkswagen quite a bit. So that happened in 2021, right around when the pandemic hit. So keep that in mind because that'll come up later in the webinar here. Another one is antitrust enforcement. Of course, Microsoft and Google. We've all seen the CEOs sitting in Congress and those legal restrictions and market share loss and behavioral remedies that are the impact there. The national security, the Broadcom, Qualcomm, we all know about that block merger. There's lots of block mergers out there because of oligopolies out, that we don't want to make sure, we want to make sure we're not governed by a single entity. The last one there, data localization with Meta and AWS and Apple, we see that and we're seeing that more and more right now. So depending on who's president, it looks like, and who's in Congress, these things are flipping and flopping all over the place on what the rules are, who's watching, who's not watching, who's letting things slide, and so forth. So there seems to be fairly more inconsistency, and unfortunately, it's becoming more partisan than it used to be, unfortunately. And so that causes more of a VUCA world because of now these recent events in the VUCA world. So how much is this costing? Well, you can see on the left-hand axis here, this is how much it cost. They estimate the cost Volkswagen in the first column, $30 billion. While we got a little bit of a hit there, Google got some fines. The Qualcomm really was, that block deal was quite substantial. The auto industry and Meta and AWS. So you can see it's not peanuts here. It's in the billions of dollars that we're talking about. Of course, now we only talk in trillions. We used to talk in billions thinking that was big. Now it's all trillions. So maybe this is small potatoes for these companies and it's the way of doing business. But it is affecting how things are being moved throughout. With that, Greg's going to give us a little bit overview on the bullwhip effect and how that fits into all of this.
Yeah, we like to call this the bullwhip effect on steroids. The bullwhip folks have been with us for our entire supply chain careers. All right, what is it? Quick definition. It's the uncertainty caused from distorted information flowing up and down the supply chain, up to your suppliers, down to your customers, both ways. So let's take a look. On the left-hand side, top left, we have the demand side. All right. So if you go from left to right, and again, you probably are all aware of this, but any change at the customer level on the left side can manifest itself in a pretty ugly way as it goes through the supply chain back up to manufacturers and suppliers. And we'll talk about why in a minute. It can also happen on the supply side on the top right. Think of the left side of the box where you have maybe a foundry or a mine. Any change or problem at that raw material arena can manifest itself downstream to the OEM and ultimately to the customer. So you can have distortions on both sides, demand and supply. During the pandemic, we called this the W-like recovery. All right, that's what we called it, and we advocated to all our clients what to do, gave them action plans, talked and showed them the bullwhip. And this is what's going to happen. Now, granted, we projected certain phases of lockdowns and so forth. We were pretty close. We thought it would manifest itself for about 18 working months. It was more like 24, 20, 27 months. But we showed this picture. We talked about the bullwhip. And this picture depicts the bullwhip from a retailer in blue, wholesaler in red, a green distributor, and a manufacturer is orange. All right, so you can see through a 12-month period, why does the bullwhip occur? Well, because of country and company policies, procedures, supply chain processes within each company, tools and techniques that they use, and culture. So it's been with us. It really manifested itself during the pandemic. And now with tariffs, we're right back there with the issue of the bullwhip. So we wanted to just give you a visual, a quick definition, and a visual of the lag time. It's the lag time in supply chain. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
So everybody's okay. So making it real now. So we're having in the first half of this year, I think everybody thought that shipping would stop. And there were actually people who said, oh, we're not shipping anything out of the West. Nothing's coming in the West Coast. And all shipping volume will plummet 35% next week. That was the end of April, was a quote by somebody. But that's not what really happened. Why didn't that happen? Well, the tariffs really didn't take an effect yet. So what would people do? People would order more, right? So people are ordering more. So both East Coast, at one time, East Coast was bringing in more than the West Coast, by the way. But now, if you look at it cumulatively over the last 6 months, the East Coast, increased volume by 12%. And the West Coast increased volumes by about 15%, trying to beat the tariffs. So we have now, instead of not ordering enough, what happens is we're over ordering in order to try to beat the tariffs. And then I've read this morning that even depending on what type of goods it is, if it's a finished good or if it's a raw material, some of that increase in price will be brought over. Some is not being brought over. So the inflation is still up in the air when we'll see the inflation, but somebody's got to pay for this at some point in time. We had this increase in volume. The shippers overseas are absorbing some of it. Depending on their competitive landscape, they may or may not transfer that over in the short term. But in the long term, what's going to happen? Who's going to see those increase of costs that they have to ship goods to the U.S.? Who's going to absorb that and how that's going to be brought over? So I thought it was quite interesting to see the difference in that we actually had an increase in volume over these last 6 months on average over last year. You probably break it down in the months and you'll see it go up and down. But I thought that was quite interesting. And so, when they say September, they will know whether or not to raise interest rates is because we haven't really seen it play out yet, the impact of the tariffs, because they haven't been put into place, and the cost of these have not been sent through to the consumer. It's been all absorbed within the supply chain, overseas and domestically, as of today. So I thought that was interesting. So if you have any comments, love to hear them, but that's what we kind of found out. And so, we're in this VUCA world. So we have this survey question as to how strongly do you feel that there will be a severe bullwhip impact to tariffs on a scale 1 to 5. So very highly negative impact to very positive impact. So if you could enter in your answers there, you can scan in the code in the upper right-hand corner, and you can just answer right there. I'll ask you to enter your name, and I see we have 3 people in there. Wait for a couple more. Meanwhile, Greg or Chris, you have any comments?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I always like it when we talk about the bullwhip effect, and we're going to see some of that coming down. And part of it is that there's a lot that is caused by distortion, but what we're going to see is also the policies kind of exponentially impacting each other throughout a supply chain begin to add to that distortion. And so some of the root cause is it's easy for people to say, well, then just clarify information, but that's not it. It gets distorted simply because of the policies and how aggressive some companies may be trying to run their companies versus more conservative and sort of slower companies. And it's some of that misbalance and things like that that generate some of that. So we're going to see that when we get to the simulations here in just a couple of slides.
Greg?
Yeah, I would. Very interesting. In any crisis, folks, in supply chain risk and resiliency, there are winners and losers, and it's good to see that remember, risk is a two-sided coin. One side, when I say risk, everyone ducks under the table because it's construed as negative. But the exemplars kind of look at risk as an opportunity. All right. One company's risk event is another company's opportunity. So that's what I see. Very interesting to see that type of profile in the answers. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks everyone for answering. We'll come back to the survey. Keep answering if you have not, and please ask questions in the chat as we move through. I'm sure you'll have lots of good, meaty questions for Chris. So, Chris?
All right. Thanks, Jim. So what we're going to get into, we kind of use this slide to set it up, is the nice interaction, sort of the perfect storm of 3 different perspectives or areas coming together. There's having the strategic in the lower left, strategic, tactical, operational perspective, leaning toward the strategic, that you got to have all those, the long-term, mid-term, and short-term. Then at the top, the strategic risk paradox, where for these big long-term strategic issues, we really don't spend that much time or energy. We spend most of our time and energy on these very short-term operational issues that have little, small relative financial impact compared to the big strategic decisions. And then we're adding simulation, specifically structural modeling, because that's a type of simulation, doesn't require much data. It's a very cause and effect relationship type modeling, and you'll see that play out. But all of this comes together to use these approaches to kind of help us do some proactive planning in this VUCA world, as Greg had talked about. So I'm going to move on. I feel like the comedian that's going to spend like 15 minutes setting up the one punchline at the end. We could start with that slide. We're going to get to one slide, which is the killer slide, but I want to build up before then. And I'm going to kind of go slow, fast, slow. I'm going to start off here, explain a few things. Then we're going to cruise through some slides because you'll see what's happening. And then we'll get down and talk some of the end stuff. So when we talk about structural simulation, structural modeling, again, it's very cause and effect causal based modeling. And so what we see here on the left here is what might be represented as a company in this, the structural modeling, the supply chain tool that we're going to show. And you see that I mentioned from scmBLOX. scmBLOX is our commercial tool. What we're actually using to do this is a tool called Beer Game on Steroids, BGOS, Beer Game on Steroids, which is a free tool that anyone can use. It's used by universities in their supply chain classes. So anyone can replicate what you're about to see. So this is not some proprietary simulation that you're not going to be able to see anything else about. So just want to note that. But what's happening is you've got a company that essentially they're producing something and they're creating a finished goods stock that they're going to deliver from. And so you've got raw materials coming in, finished goods, and in that supply chain, the finished goods from one company becomes the raw materials to the other company, and so on. And so we're just sort of drawing three of them here. Now, what you see at the bottom of each of them is a dial. And this is my shout out to Spinal Tap. If you've seen that movie, these dials go up to 11. And so what we represent with these dials is the desired recovery time to get to the desired finished goods buffer. So if I'm trying to hold either 2 weeks of inventory or an extra 100 items in finished goods inventory, when I'm not at that level, I can either be aggressive trying to get back to that level quickly. If I've got some gap, I try to close that gap very quickly, or I can be a little more slower with that and average, sort of have a moving average over time. So we're going to use the terms high, medium, and low. High means I'm very aggressive trying to close that gap. Medium, of course, is somewhere in between. And then low is more conservative of I'm going to sort of drag this out. I don't know if the changes I'm seeing with demand are true. And so I don't want to overreact too much. So what we're showing here is what you're about to see some simulations for. I got multiple companies and we're going to look at that. So the first scenario we're going to look at is just a 25% increase in demand. And if you're familiar with the beer game, the traditional beer game, it's like that. It's just all of a sudden there's a bump in demand that just stays and it's sustained. So we're going to look at some slides now. So in this case, I've only got a tier one. I've got an OEM, that's me, let's say, and the tier one. Now, what you see is a layout of 9 different, this is like a design of experiments or a set of scientific experiments where I'm matching different policies. So I'm looking at the policies, the inventory control policies of the OEM and the tier one supplier. And in the upper left, they are both high. In other words, they are both being very aggressive. And you can see the lines there. You don't necessarily have to know what they are, but it's the finished goods inventory. You can see the black line at the bottom is my jump in demand. It goes and stays up. And then we see reactions. And it's a little bit of the bullwhip effect. The blue line is the OEM and the dashed green line is the tier one, which is more. And so that's what Greg was showing with the bullwhip effect, that at the front of the supply chain, there are some oscillations. They get bigger as they travel through. So, of course, the OEM is going to be smaller and the tier one is going to be larger. In the middle, you've got medium and medium. So they're both kind of, somewhat there in the middle. And you'll notice it kind of dies down. Some of those oscillations die down. And then in the lower right, you've got low, low. They're both being very slow to respond. So I want to look at the upper left and the lower right and do a quick comparison. The upper left shows a lot of more oscillations. You can just see that visually. These are all on the same scale. See that visually, a lot more oscillations. However, it actually settles down to that higher level of demand fairly quickly compared to the lower right. The lower right, there's not as much chaos, but then again, it takes a while to balance, finally reach that new level because, of course, everyone's taking their time. So you've got chaos, but quickly snap in or slowly snap in and be a little more controlled. Now we're going to just show the rest of the combinations. I just wanted those, but now these are the rest of the combinations. And this is the benefit of doing some of this structural simulation is I can sit there, we can do all these and run them all against each other, everything else being held constant. And so we can see that mix. But the main thing is that diagonal. And from here on, we're eventually just going to be focusing on that diagonal. So now what we're going to do is change the demand just a little bit. So while we're going to have that same increase in demand, but instead of sustaining it, after 20 weeks, we're going to drop that demand back down to what it was. So we're going to have 25% increase. It's going to drop back down. And we're going to, while everyone's responding to the first increase, they're then going to have to all of a sudden respond to the second. We're going to introduce some resilience metrics that we're going to use to sort of gauge the performance here. There's the amplitude, and I'm reading the definition on the left, but you see over on the right, I'm giving an example chart and I'm showing the terms there. So the amplitude is sort of the highest maximum I see in my inventory minus my lowest minimum that I see. And this is all in percentage. It's all relative. I'm not trying to say 173 versus 67 67. I'm saying it was 110% above at 50% below, so there's a 60% amplitude. The time to recover is how long it takes from my initial change to when I start getting off pattern. I'm no longer in my sort of steady state to where I finally settle back down into a new steady state. But within 5%, it kind of takes a while to really nail it to 100%. So we're going to say when you're within 5%, that's considered kind of nailed in on that. The last thing we're going to introduce are cycles or swings, and those are the number of high-low or low-high combinations. So in this example, I'm showing there's 3 for the tier 1 supplier. I see a low-high, I see another low-high, and another low-high. And so these are 3 metrics we're going to look at: amplitude, cycles and swings, and then time to recover as we go forward. So now with that new demand, I'm going to first show these charts because that's what you saw before, and then we'll switch to those, looking at those metrics. But now if you look, the black line that represents the orders has bumped up and then gone back down. So the beginning part of this is sort of the same as what we saw before, but now there's all this reaction where suddenly I'm trying to grow my inventory and now demand went down, so I got to start shrinking my inventory. So we see a lot of oscillations in that upper left, high, high. Go down to the lower right, the low, low. It's a little more controlled, but again, slower to respond, but we're not hitting the highs. We're not seeing multiple cycles here. And then we can just fill in the rest of the diagrams here and just show you the various combinations. Again, one of the benefits of doing this is a digital twin, and I can sit there and hold things constant and change things. So now let's look at this instead of in a graph form. Let's look at those metrics. And so we're going to look at amplitude, time to recover, and cycles for all of these. So in that upper left, I'm going to really focus on the high, high, medium, medium, and low, low, that diagonal again. So when everyone's aggressive, the 2 companies here, the OEM and the tier 1, the amplitude for the OEM is 63%, for the tier 1, 141. That's that bullwhip effect. The time to recover goes from 34 to 50 for those, and the OEM has 2 cycles and the tier 1 has 4 cycles, so even more oscillations. So now in the lower right, we see that everything's a little more controlled. The amplitude for the OEM is roughly the same, but the tier 1 dropped from 141 down to 103, so a little more controlled. But you'll notice the time to recover has expanded for both of them from 34 and 50 to 56 and 51 respectively. And the cycles have also settled down just like the amplitude did. So instead of 2-4, it's 1-1. So we're going to start looking at these tables now also to kind of understand these resilience metrics. So let's get a little more complicated. So that was just an OEM and a tier 1. Now we're going to add a tier 2. Now, of course, if we were to sit there and do like I did before, it'd be a 3x3x3, 27, different charts, and it'd be a lot to look at. So I'm only going to look at that diagonal, essentially. Everyone's high, everyone's medium, everyone's low. And so here is that same, I'm using that same bump in demand that then comes back down, exactly the same, except now all I've done is I've added a tier 3. Everything's the same. I just got someone else on the back end of the supply chain. And you'll see that bullwhip effect right here in the high, high, where everyone's aggressive and they're kind of over ordering and trying to adjust really quickly. You see the blue line is the OEM, the dashed green line is the tier 1, and then that dotted red line is the tier 2. So the amplitudes are growing as they move back into the supply chain as we would expect. So then we can go ahead and look at the medium, medium, and even the low, low, and see how those lay out. And you'll see that amplitudes decrease from the all high to all medium to all low. The cycles decrease from the all high to all medium to all low, but the time to recover has expanded from the all high to all medium, all low. And so we're going to skip the medium, and we're really kind of looking at those extremes of if everyone's aggressive versus if everyone's kind of slower or more controlled. So that's interesting. We're seeing a lot more oscillations, a lot more volatility here. But let's go ahead and expand this a little bit more and add a third tier. So this is another benefit of doing some of this structural modeling where you don't require, you'll notice I haven't shown you much data at all. I didn't need to know was the demand exactly 173 on that day? Did I exactly have 47 in inventory? We don't need data like that. There's a lot that can be done with some general assumptions. And so here, that's what allows us to dig deeper into the supply chain. So now we've got 3 tiers. And when everyone is reacting aggressively, really trying to close that gap, their inventory gap very quickly, here again, bullwhip effect. It's now even expanded. Our tier 3 is even worse. So you see that bump in demand goes down and that growing amplitude. And now we can go to the all high and even the all low and look at those now and see where they stand. And again, kind of look at the ends of those, the all high versus the all low. And you'll see again, amplitudes are decreasing for everybody. The time to recover is increasing and the cycles are decreasing. And it's that trade-off of chaos that can quickly get you to the new level of demand versus a more controlled, slower approach that takes longer. Which one's better? It depends on what you're trying to do, but we're showing the difference, the relative difference that these can make. So very
Chris, we got a question come in.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the question is, the oscillation we see in the all high and versus the all low. In real life, these are coming over many weeks. And
correct. I mean, these are weeks right here. This is a
weeks.
Is a 2-year simulation. Yeah.
Over weeks. But the question is, very often during these times, people reorder, overorder. What would be the effect of people panic orders, duplicate orders will be on these graphs?
Some of that's actually considered in here. And so it is capturing some of that because what you have is someone orders and then they panic a little bit and they continue to order. And then they back off at the back end when stuff starts coming in. And so we've captured some of that. Whether it's, again, these are sort of some generic policies on inventory control. With scmBLOX, we're using beer game on steroids. With scmBLOX, we could get more specific and say, what exactly is your policy? And we'll capture that. But with beer game on steroids, it's a very generic policy. And so some of that is captured.
The point
but
is,
it would exasperate this. Yeah.
The point is you could model that for somebody if they wanted to see and reflect upon different scenarios that could be occurring or have occurred in the past in that manner.
Absolutely. And right here with what we're doing, you can just imagine it would be worse. This is already.
You would imagine it's worse because you're going to exasperate the bullwhip effect if you panic.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so all this, again, building up to the punchline here. So what I want to do, this is the 3-tier situation. This is the all high. Everybody's aggressive. From here on, this is our scenario that we're going to look at. Everyone is aggressive because that's the worst bullwhip we see. So what we're going to do is now take a look at is if all the companies act individually, they're the lone cowboys that are going to, which is how we typically approach things is, I really don't care what anyone else is doing. I'm going to do something to benefit me. And so we're going to look at everybody doing that. So we're going to start with the OEM. So if only the OEM makes these changes, and the changes we're talking about is the OEM says, I'm going to get a little more lean, and I'm going to reduce my manufacturing time, and I'm going to reduce my safety stock, both of those by 50%. We can see in the new chart on the right here that there is some impact. If I just kind of, again, it's the same scale, just visually look at these, and the inventory levels are really crazy in that one on the left when everyone's reacting. But now the OEM, so everyone's still reacting high aggression, being aggressive. However, the OEM has introduced this sort of lean initiative and kind of leaned out some of their process. Well, you can see we're showing in the second table in the lower right that who benefits the most, and the bright green is great improvements, and the lesser green means sort of improvements. So what we have here in this case, when the OEM does this, the OEM has some improvements. The tier 1 actually benefits a lot. Tier 3 benefits a little bit, and tier 2 benefits a little bit, and tier 3 benefits a lot. So not everyone's benefiting the same amount necessarily. So that's just an example. We take the OEM, this is what it looks like. If we do another example, and now we take the tier 1, the tier 1 is going to make that same changes. Everyone else, OEM, tier 2, tier 3, all stay the same. They're all still highly aggressive in addressing that gap because we want to look at that massive bullwhip effect. So now it's the tier one doing those exact same changes. Now you'll see now, again, that chart, yeah, there's some improvements. And now let's look at the table. Notice there was no benefit for the OEM in this situation. It was the tier one that was doing this, and the OEM didn't benefit. The tier one happened to benefit. You can see the bright green. They benefited a lot. The tier two actually got a little bit worse in that case. And tier three, they did all right. They did a little bit better. So mixed results, but tier one, they made some changes. And in this particular case, worked out well for them. They looked good. Everyone else didn't. Like it says, tier two even got a little bit worse. So we're doing this one by one. So let's now move on to tier two. So here again on the left is all high. And now when tier two does this, you'll see that the OEM, and again, it's the exact same change, but it's only tier two doing it. So we're individually walking through, again, the benefit of structural modeling, design of experiments. But you'll notice the OEM and the tier one don't benefit at all. The tier two sort of benefits, but really tier three is the biggest beneficiary of that change at the tier two level. So it's very interesting to see that. So here's the punchline that I'm going to get to you. Everyone's high. If they all in unison implement those same changes, look at the results. Massive difference. Massive difference. Completely cuts out the bullwhip effect if everyone is working in unison. Now notice also everyone is bright green now. Everyone had significant improvements. It's not mixed anymore, or no one's getting hurt by someone else making an action. What this says is, hey, I trust you when I act this way, that you're going to also act this way. Or if I'm going to do this, I know you're also going to do this. And so it's like a train that has all the cars connected and they all move together versus automobiles at a stoplight where the first one goes and then the next one goes, and they're all kind of moving independently. Here, they're connected and they're moving, much like a Toyota supply chain would do. And so as much as everyone sort of bangs on lean, that lean creates these brittle supply chains, it really only creates brittle supply chains when you are acting independently. And in this guy, that's why I picked lean, is that's been kind of beat up a little bit. But when we're all working together, it shows that the alignment of policies has a significant impact on the performance of this supply chain. So there's your punchline. We'll have we still got some slides to cover, but that in essence is the power of this policy alignment. So when we look at designing for resilience, I want you to consider some trade-offs. We kind of use the analogy of a three-legged stool. We showed you these resilience metrics: amplitude, cycles and swings, and time to recover. And there's trade-offs there. They don't all necessarily all improve at the same time. In fact, if we one by one try to improve them, then we have this situation where if I'm looking at amplitude, I'm going to try to drive the amplitude down. The cycles and swings go down, but the time to recover goes up. We saw that. If the more controlled I am, the longer it takes. If instead I'm trying to drive the cycles down, well, it just so happens cycles and amplitudes are correlated and they work together. So the amplitude goes down, but again, time to recover increases. If I want to focus on time to recover, I get that opposite. The other two increases, I'm trying to drive the time to recover down. So there are always these trade-offs that you need to be careful for. There is not one silver bullet answer. Now, you may be asking yourself, we got one more slide for these simulations. Well, why didn't you show me what happened at tier three? You showed me if the OEM acted independently. You showed me the tier one acted independently, tier two. Well, what happens if the tier three? Well, Batman to pow. It actually is quite unstable, because when you take the further you are in that bullwhip effect and you try to be aggressive, you just way overshoot 10 times, 20 times what's needed, and it just goes unstable. So it's ugly. Pow, we're not going to show those results. But the rest of this, just again, going back to that punchline slide, is that the alignment of policies has a huge impact on the performance of the supply chain. And that's where structural modeling comes in handy, because that's what you can do with structural modeling, is understand how the policies of each entity in that supply chain either help or hurt the entire supply chain as a system. So thanks, Jim. I'll let.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great overview. Certainly answered a lot of questions that we all had. I thought it was a very excellent overview. Please I'm sure there's more scenarios out there. Please share with us your thoughts on that. And I'm just looking at the survey results, see if there's any more feelings about this, about the bullwhip effect due to the tariffs. It seems to be there's a small contingent, 15% of 14% of the people say there'll be a positive impact of, and most of the folks are more on the negative side. No right or wrong here. It's just what you feel, and are you ready for it? Because we feel like we're in the calm before the storm, as we would call it. That we haven't seen it yet, and when it happens, you don't want to over order, which what you're doing now. You're filling up your warehouse, and now you don't have enough warehouse space. And at some point in time, hopefully demand catches up, but at some point in time, it's going to settle out in the VUCA world. Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very, very compelling, and it's almost, folks, counterintuitive. All right, that's the rub of the bullwhip effect. And if you've ever played with the beer game, as Chris described, everyone, no matter how many years they've been in supply chain and operations, always gets surprised when they do the tabletop beer game. They always get surprised for one reason: bullwhip impact based on policies of companies. So very interesting, very compelling set of scenarios from Chris. So very, very good. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Greg, the moral of the story is Greg's going to give us.
Yeah, a real quick moral of the story. We tried to kind of put it into perspective. It is very compelling when you go through structural modeling. All right. And the net is individual companies to us have limited impact on the bullwhip effect. Another one: coordinated supply chain policies, as Chris mentioned, seem to operate more effectively via what Chris demonstrated through the scenarios. Supply chains compete now against other supply chains. That's why we're focusing on the connection, the historical, or I'll say the holistic connection between companies in a supply chain. So it's no longer, to us, company versus company, it's supply chain versus supply chain. And then we talked about, Chris mentioned trust. We think trust is a big critical element. A real quick story: we have friends at Davos this year who went in, sat down, act as the scribe, listened to all the conversations. One thing he said to us, he said, in private conversations, all through the hallways and so forth, trust, or the lack of trust, was prevalent at Davos for the first time in maybe 30 years. Trust between countries and companies seems to be at the lowest level in the last 30 years. That's from an individual who spent time with the Davos delegates. Trust is very, very critical going forward. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And with that, we'll go into the last section here on some scenario walkthroughs. Hopefully, we'll get some questions coming in on these in the results. So what we did as a case study, we looked at the automotive industry and says, what's the yearly car sales by manufacturer from 2010 to 2025, with a red dashed line marking the start of COVID-19. So the lockdown in 2020. So what was the effect, and who was able to recover the fastest? So the top line here, the blue, is Toyota. Then you got Volkswagen. The green is Hyundai, Kia. Then you got General Motors, and so forth. So you can see what was the trend before 2020? Did they take advantage? So we always talk about, when there's a risk event, that's an opportunity to gain your unfair market share. So who did that? Well, it looks like Toyota was actually, if I was following it quite closely on the number of cars being sold between Toyota and Volkswagen, and they were neck and neck. And actually, Volkswagen was outdoing Toyota just before the pandemic. But again, if you remember the beginning of the presentation, Volkswagen also got hit with that anti. They were cheating on the fuel mileage, so they got a double whammy. So they got COVID and the sanctions against them because of what they did on cheating on fuel economy on their cars. So they have not recovered from there, but they're a resilient company. It took them a couple years, and now they're back on track to hope, for their perspective, they're going to try to eclipse Toyota in the future. Toyota recovered quite quickly. Other companies, GM has not, it continues to go down on number of cars sold. The grain, Hyundai, seem to see this. I could think you could see the effects on the road. You see more of these cars than you ever did before. So is this an interesting case study? Is it absolutely perfectly documented cause and effect? Maybe not, but it gives you an idea of what's going on. So we have one more case study that Greg will bring through on the retail industry that he's very familiar with.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Jim. This is a picture image of yearly revenue from 2010 to 2025 for fashion retailers, including guys like Zara, H&M, Uniqlo, Gap, Shine, Primark. On the left-hand side are U.S. revenue dollars in billions, I believe. On the x-axis on the bottom are the years. And then, as Jim mentioned as well, the red vertical dash line is COVID. And you can see how the different fast fashion companies came out of COVID. The purple top line there on the right, that's Shine, that's the Chinese manufacturer. The blue in the middle there is Zara. Zara is very, very good, folks. They are very good at supply chain management performance, risk management. They have 17 seasons. They drive everything from demand pull, not push. All right. Everyone is chasing Zara over the last 10 years. The orange line below blue Zara is H&M. They are trying to replicate what H&M does. They have a lot of culture issues and process issues, but the net is take a look at Shine. Shine outshined everyone after the pandemic. Because why? Why did they grow exponentially? Because they figured out what Zara was doing. They copied what Zara's doing in supply chain and marketing. And the problem right now is they're under scrutiny by governments for two things: labor issues and ecological impact. So the jury is still out, but you can see again, the time to recovery is really what we're after here, showing you some impacts of companies and their time to recovery. So with that, I'll turn it to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And as always, we try to put together some action planning on what you can do now. So we have covered these many times and many webinars, so I'm not going to go through these all in detail, but they're pretty straightforward. Diversify suppliers, invest in recycling, reuse, promotion, substitution, innovation. These are all things that you should be doing. If you're not doing these different things, go through the list and maximize your resiliency one by one. And they're pretty much in order of what most companies start with and where they go. But, always go to the place that is going to provide you the best benefit. So having assessment done. That's why we have a supply chain risk and resiliency assessment. We can help you, guide you with your supply chain on where to act first, second, and third on this. But with that, I'd just like to have Greg put in the policy coordination with supply chain network.
Yeah, kind of just a little bit of a synopsis here, folks. And that is, it seems to us policy coordination within a supply chain network could be the next frontier, and we talked about all the elements and tactics in Chris's scenarios. Why do we advocate policy coordination? To mitigate the amplitude of the bullwhip effect and to recover faster. Two of the three elements that Chris showed. Why, folks? Because in supply chain and risk, two things. Speed is life and time is money. All right. So partnership, relationship, trust building, we think that's going to be a critical element going forward for successful supply chains. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks. If you've attended some of our other webinars, this is what we typically walk through, and is what you saw in action today. But a company that's doing this, the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, has the supply chain readiness assessment that Greg talked about earlier. So that's a first step, is understand where you currently are. And how ready are you for some of these activities? Then what you saw with the structural modeling simulations is mapping end to end. And again, with structural modeling, you don't have to have data for every single thing, which usually is what prevents companies from looking at a full supply chain. You can start with the bill of material. The bill of material, the supply chain typically mirrors the bill of material. And so just build sort of a generic supply chain to start with to get you end to end, and then add information where you have it. Then start looking at what your top issues are and do some what if scenarios around those. Disruptions, different constraints or whatever, those can all be captured. Do these structural modeling simulations so that you are looking at relative differences and not really trying to say specifically this is the exact number that's going to happen tomorrow. You're looking long term, how things act, react, and recover over the long term. And what you end up with is essentially a playbook. A lot of what we did with the military with scmBLOX was create these playbooks. Under situation A, you do X. Under situation B, you do Y. And then it becomes a matter of kind of watching the environment and watching certain metrics to see, as things change, which playbook kind of kicks off. And that's been a very effective approach. So thanks, Jim. So that's how you get started right there.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And hopefully you enjoyed the webinar today, and we hit all the deliverables. If there's additional questions you have, please reach out. You know how to reach us on LinkedIn or by email. You have that in the invite. Follow up this morning. Feel free to reach out at any time. Again, that was the first webinar. Our second webinar will be the physics of supply chains, buffer inventories, cycle times, and flow dynamics. Hopefully that's exciting to you as it is to us.
Yeah, I'm thrilled with it. It's very exciting.
So we hope that you'll be able to join us at our next webinar, and do please reach out if you have any questions, comments, suggestions on our webinars to make them more engaging and interesting. With that, I'll have each one close it out. Greg, you want to go first?
Just thanks a lot for hanging in there with us. And we think this is pretty important, especially the two threads: trust throughout the supply chain and the impact of policy misalignment. So thanks a lot. All the best.
Yeah, I'll just add, first of all, Daniel Stanton, I appreciate more cowbell. Love it. I have a t-shirt that has that on there. But what's counterintuitive here, and I like results like this is not what we would have expected. And to see that play out, it begins to really push the boundaries of what we think is possible in supply chains and where we ought to be digging and what we ought to be doing in supply chains. We have very much been, up to this point, myopic and individually oriented as a company in how we look at the supply chain. I care about me. And what we're finding is that there's power in the teamwork aspect of this and the policy alignment.
And I want to thank Chris and Greg. This was a lot of work to put together the webinar. I think it came out pretty well, but I'd love to hear everybody's feedback on the webinar and how we can make it better. For me, this is so important as the VUCA world is becoming more and more fragmented. We've gone from a global economy to a multipolar economy, and we're shocking our way back to how we used to do things before. So with those shocks, people are going to react, and you need to want to act faster than your nearest competitor. And as Greg said, speed is life. So we got to move fast. And with today's technology, if everybody is on the same page in your supply chain, you're going to be able to manage these tumultuous times very easily. If your supply chain is disjointed and you're not aligned, you're going to see a lot of risks coming up, and it's going to make you more uncompetitive. And as Greg and Chris mentioned, it's going to be supply chain against supply chain. So beef up your supply chain. Go out and co-create with your suppliers and customers to be number one. And that's it. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.